Picture this. A trained radar operator watches three solid objects appear on his screen, hovering motionlessly over nuclear missile silos. At the same moment, security personnel on the ground stare up at brilliant lights arranged in a perfect triangle. The objects hold their formation for minutes, then suddenly ascend vertically at impossible speeds, vanishing from multiple radar systems simultaneously. This isn't science fiction. This happened over Montana in 1978, documented in official NORAD logs that still exist today. Now imagine this. Within hours of that incident, men in dark suits arrive at witnesses' homes. They know details that were never publicly shared. They offer no credentials, yet speak with absolute authority. They suggest firmly that it would be better to forget what was seen. Then they disappear, leaving only fear and silence behind. For decades, we've been asking the wrong question. We've been asking, are UFOs real? When we should have been asking, what is the intelligence behind them trying to accomplish? Tonight, we're going to examine something that researchers have overlooked for too long: the pattern. Not individual sightings, but the deliberate, methodical way these encounters unfold, the way they target specific locations, the way they interact with witnesses, and most tellingly, the way they're systematically suppressed. What you're about to hear isn't a collection of random strange events. It's evidence of something far more unsettling, a coordinated phenomenon that operates with clear intention, that demonstrates advanced understanding of human psychology and infrastructure, and that has maintained consistent patterns across decades and continents. By the end of this investigation, you'll understand why the real mystery isn't what these objects are, but what they're studying about us, and why powerful forces work so hard to keep witnesses silent. Let's start with something that becomes obvious once you examine enough cases closely. These encounters don't happen randomly. The phenomenon selects specific types of witnesses with remarkable precision. This isn't about lights seen from a distance by unreliable observers. We're talking about trained professionals, people whose credibility cannot be easily dismissed, people whose testimony carries weight precisely because their entire careers depend on accurate observation. Consider the pattern that emerges when we look at who experiences these encounters. Military personnel stationed at nuclear facilities, police officers on patrol in remote areas, aviation professionals with decades of experience, meteorological technicians working in isolated outposts. These aren't people prone to flights of fancy. They're individuals trained to remain calm under pressure, to document what they observe accurately, and to follow strict protocols when reporting unusual events. Take the case of the forestry inspector in Albania. This wasn't a civilian wandering through the woods hoping to see something strange. This was a 41-year-old professional with 20 years of field experience conducting routine inspections he'd performed hundreds of times before. He carried standard equipment, followed established procedures, and had no interest whatsoever in UFO phenomena. Yet something found him in that forest, something that demonstrated its presence through deliberate light flashes, that revealed itself gradually, that seemed to be studying him as much as he was observing it. The precision of witness selection becomes even more apparent when we examine the Kamchatka incident. A weather station technician, alone in a remote cabin, experienced in isolation, psychologically stable with 7 previous rotations completed without incident. This man had seen every type of weather phenomenon, every atmospheric anomaly that occurs in that harsh environment. He knew the difference between natural occurrences and something unexplained. When something appeared outside his window, moving with mechanical precision, tilting its head at exact angles as if scanning the interior of his cabin, he recognized immediately that this fell outside any category of his extensive experience. What's particularly revealing is what happens after these encounters. The witness doesn't run screaming into the night. They don't immediately call everyone they know. Instead, they follow their training. They document what they saw. They file reports through proper channels. They behave exactly as you'd expect trained professionals to behave. And then, in case after case, something extraordinary happens. The official response arrives far too quickly, with far too much specific knowledge, asking far too precise questions.
The farmhouse intrusion in Goulburn, Australia demonstrates this pattern perfectly. A family with no history of unusual experiences, living a predictable rural life, suddenly finds a tall figure standing in their kitchen doorway at midnight. The father, protective and rational, doesn't panic. He observes. He notes the elongated fingers, the proportions that don't match any human he's ever seen, the eyes that reflect light like an animal's but with the wrong shape. He experiences physical sensations, a vibration in his chest that intensifies as he approaches, a paralysis that feels like pressure applied from nowhere. And then, most tellingly, within an hour of calling police, men arrive claiming to be from a government communications division. They don't check wiring or fuses. They ask very specific questions about what the figure looked like, how it moved, what physical effects occurred. Then they firmly suggest the family not share details publicly because people might misinterpret the situation.
This is the pattern. Professional witnesses or ordinary people in their own homes experience encounters that demonstrate clear intelligence and apparent purpose. They respond appropriately, following established procedures for reporting unusual events, and then the suppression begins, always following the same script. Officials arrive who know too much. Questions are asked that reveal foreknowledge. Witnesses are warned, politely but firmly, to remain silent. Evidence disappears or becomes classified. The encounter is buried. What does this tell us? It suggests the phenomenon understands human social structures well enough to predict exactly how witnesses will respond. It knows that trained professionals will follow protocols, that families will call authorities, that documentation will be created. And it suggests that whatever suppresses these reports also operates with remarkable efficiency, moving into action so quickly that it must have been monitoring the situation before witnesses even made their first phone call. This isn't random chaos. This is a choreographed dance where both sides know their roles, except the witnesses don't realize they're performing until the final act has already begun.
Now, let's examine what these encounters reveal about the capabilities behind this phenomenon. We're not talking about vague lights in the sky that could be anything. We're talking about demonstrated technologies that operate on principles we don't fully understand, displaying characteristics that remain beyond our current engineering capabilities. Start with the most basic observation that appears in case after case: complete electrical disruption. Not the kind of power failure where circuits trip and breakers need to be reset. We're talking about instantaneous, total loss of electrical function across multiple systems simultaneously, followed by equally instantaneous restoration with no apparent damage to any components. The Goulburn farmhouse experienced this. Power throughout the entire house simply dropped, not fading or dimming, but stopping completely, as if someone had thrown a switch that controlled every electrical circuit at once. Then, the moment the figure withdrew, power returned instantly. Lights came back on, appliances restarted, everything functioned normally as if nothing had occurred. This same pattern appears in the Gronig Valley encounter. A car traveling along a mountain road experiences sudden electrical failure. The engine dies, the headlights drop to a weak glow, interior lights fade. The driver tries the ignition repeatedly. Nothing. The starter barely clicks. Every electrical system in the vehicle has been compromised. Then, 3 small figures in metallic suits inspect the vehicle, conducting what appears to be a methodical examination. The moment they withdraw, the car starts normally. No mechanical failure is ever found. The battery, supposedly drained completely, shows no lasting damage and functions properly immediately afterward.
Think about what this implies. Whatever causes these electrical disruptions can target specific vehicles or buildings while leaving surrounding infrastructure completely unaffected. It can disable multiple independent electrical systems simultaneously. It can maintain this disruption for as long as needed, then release it instantly without causing permanent damage to sensitive electronics. Our best electromagnetic pulse weapons create massive disruption, but also cause lasting damage to circuits. They affect everything in a broad radius. They can't be precisely controlled or instantly reversed. Yet this phenomenon demonstrates exactly those capabilities repeatedly across decades and continents. The physical effects on witnesses reveal even more sophisticated capabilities. We're not talking about crude paralysis, where muscles simply lock up. The sensations described are far more nuanced. The father in the Goulburn farmhouse felt his arms grow heavy, his shoulders tightening involuntarily. He could still move, but with greatly reduced strength, as if something unseen was applying pressure downward. This wasn't total immobilization, it was modulated control, allowing some movement while restricting others, as if the force being applied could be precisely calibrated to achieve exactly the desired level of restraint. In the Grondigal Valley case, the woman lost all sensation in her arms and legs. She remained conscious, aware, able to speak. Her brain functioned normally, but her limbs simply wouldn't respond. This wasn't unconsciousness or paralysis in the medical sense. It was a selective disruption of the connection between brain and body, affecting motor control while leaving cognitive function intact. The man simultaneously experienced pressure in his chest, strong enough to restrict breathing but not enough to cause pain or render him unconscious. Both effects ended the moment the figures withdrew, not gradually fading, but stopping instantly, as if someone had flipped a switch.
This suggests a technology capable of affecting human nervous systems with remarkable precision, not crude stunning or incapacitation, but selective interference with specific neural pathways, the ability to suppress motor function while leaving sensory awareness intact, the capability to create physical sensations of pressure or weight without applying actual mechanical force, and critically, the capacity to maintain these effects at exact levels for extended periods, then terminate them instantly without after effects. The movement capabilities observed are equally revealing, objects that hover motionlessly with no visible means of propulsion, craft that accelerate from standstill to impossible speeds without producing sonic booms, figures that move backward in smooth gliding motions without visible leg movement or weight shift. In the Domsden Woods encounter, entities described as amorphous and jelly-like moved with surprising coordination, their lower sections expanding and contracting rhythmically to propel them forward. When the car horn sounded, they retreated rapidly, moving faster than they had approached, contracting and pulling back in one fluid sequence. This wasn't mechanical locomotion. It suggested something that could manipulate its own physical structure, perhaps alter its interaction with gravity or inertia. The radar data from multiple military encounters demonstrates performance characteristics that remain unexplained. Objects tracked at high altitude, moving at speeds too slow for satellites but too high for known aircraft, maintaining perfectly stable altitude without variation despite atmospheric conditions. Craft that appear simultaneously on multiple radar systems, ruling out equipment malfunction or atmospheric anomaly. Returns that show consistent amplitude and phase stability, indicating solid metallic objects rather than clutter or interference. Then, sudden disappearances, not gradual fading, but instantaneous vanishing between radar sweeps, as if the objects simply ceased to exist in our observable space.
What does all this tell us about the technology involved? We're looking at capabilities that operate on principles fundamentally different from our current understanding of physics. The ability to manipulate electromagnetic fields with precision we can't match. Technology that can interface directly with biological nervous systems. Propulsion that doesn't rely on conventional thrust or aerodynamic lift. Materials or structures that can alter their physical properties at will. And perhaps most significantly, systems that can affect multiple domains simultaneously, disrupting electrical infrastructure while inducing physical effects on living beings, while maintaining precise flight control. This isn't simply advanced human technology that we haven't publicly acknowledged. The consistency of these capabilities across decades, appearing in encounters from the 1950s through the present day, suggests something that has maintained technological superiority throughout our own rapid advancement.
Whatever this represents, it has sustained a level of sophistication that remains beyond our reach despite exponential growth in our own capabilities. That alone should tell us we're dealing with something far more significant than classified military projects or experimental aircraft.
Let's shift focus now to examine something even more unsettling than the physical capabilities demonstrated: the behavioral patterns. The way these encounters unfold reveals something displaying not just advanced technology, but sophisticated understanding of human psychology and social dynamics. Consider how encounters typically begin, not with dramatic announcements or aggressive displays, but with subtle intrusions that escalate gradually. A strange light in the distance, an unusual sound outside, a figure glimpsed briefly, then gone. The phenomenon doesn't crash through the door, it announces its presence incrementally, giving witnesses time to process each stage before revealing more. This isn't random, it's a calculated approach that manages the psychological impact, preventing panic while ensuring the encounter makes a lasting impression. The Goulburn farmhouse demonstrates this perfectly. The father awakes to sounds on the roof, not crashing or banging, but the impression of weight moving deliberately across tin sheets. Unusual enough to notice, not threatening enough to trigger immediate alarm. Then the lights flicker and fail, still explicable, possibly just a power failure. Then the physical sensation begins, the vibration in his chest, each stage building on the previous one, creating mounting tension without triggering flight response. Only after all this preparation does the figure reveal itself, standing partially inside the kitchen entrance. By this point, the father has processed multiple unusual events, each one priming him for something beyond normal experience. When he finally sees the entity, he's shocked but not incapacitated by terror. He can still observe, still note details. The encounter has been structured to allow witness testimony to be coherent and detailed. The same pattern appears in the forest encounters. The Albanian inspector sees flashes of light, distant and unthreatening, then closer flashes, revealing more detail, then finally the figure between the trees, tall and strange, but not aggressive. Each revelation is timed to occur after the witness has processed the previous one. The phenomenon demonstrates understanding that humans need time to assimilate unprecedented experiences, that overwhelming someone all at once produces trauma and confusion rather than clear observation. Even more revealing is how these entities interact once revealed. They don't rush forward, they don't grab or attack. Instead, they observe, they study. They conduct what can only be described as examinations, methodical and unhurried. The three figures in Gronic Valley circled the stalled car, each positioned at different points, examining the vehicle from multiple angles. One tapped the hood repeatedly, as if testing material composition or scanning for something beneath the surface. Another studied the interior through the window, tilting its helmet as if adjusting visual perspective. The third examined the undercarriage. This wasn't random wandering, it was coordinated investigation. Each figure assigned a specific area to inspect, while the others continued their own examinations. In the Domston Woods case, the entities demonstrated even more sophisticated coordination. They emerged from near the disc in a group, advanced toward the witnesses together, and when they made contact, their actions were synchronized. One attached to Hans's leg, while another pressed against his torso. Their movements coordinated as if following a shared plan. When they attempted to drag the men toward the craft, they adjusted their grips and positions in response to resistance, working together with clear purpose. Then, when the car horn sounded, they released both men simultaneously and retreated in perfect coordination. This suggests communication and planning far beyond simple animal behavior or automated response.
The most psychologically sophisticated aspect appears in how the phenomenon handles witness reactions. In Goulburn, when the children began crying, the figure tilted its head, responding to the emotional distress with what appeared to be curiosity or assessment. It didn't flee or attack, it adjusted its behavior, observing how its presence affected the family. In Kamchatka, the figure at the window engaged in controlled head movements, tilting precisely to scan different areas of the cabin, moving with mechanical smoothness that suggested deliberate demonstration of its non-human nature. These aren't creatures operating on instinct. They're displaying awareness of being observed, adjusting their behavior based on witness reactions, perhaps even calibrating their presence to achieve specific psychological effects. The aftermath of encounters reveals another layer of psychological sophistication. Witnesses consistently report lingering physical effects that aren't severe enough to require medical intervention, but significant enough to serve as undeniable proof the experience was real. Mild headaches lasting days, skin sensitivity at contact points, rashes that gradually fade, numbness that persists for a day or two then disappears completely. These effects are precisely calibrated, significant enough to validate the encounter in the witness's mind, preventing them from dismissing it as hallucination or dream, but not severe enough to create lasting injury or provide medical evidence that could be definitively analyzed. The aftermath of encounters reveals another layer of psychological sophistication. The timing of these after effects is also revealing. They typically last just long enough for the witness to tell close family or friends before fading completely, long enough for the story to be shared privately, but short enough that by the time any official investigation begins, the physical evidence has vanished. This suggests understanding of how human social networks operate, how information spreads from person to person, and how to ensure the encounter becomes part of personal testimony without leaving analyzable physical traces.
Perhaps most unsettling is the apparent understanding of human authority structures and how to exploit them. The phenomenon seems to know that professional witnesses will follow established reporting procedures. It knows that families will call police. It knows that documentation will be created through official channels. And it times encounters to occur when this will happen, as if the creation of official reports is itself part of the intended outcome. The encounters aren't hidden from authorities. They're staged to ensure authorities become involved, creating a paper trail that exists but remains inaccessible to public scrutiny. This brings us to the suppression that follows, which demonstrates perhaps the most sophisticated psychological operation of all. The men who arrive after encounters display deep understanding of human fear and compliance. They know exactly how much pressure to apply. Their threats aren't dramatic or violent, they're subtle, delivered with calm authority that makes resistance seem futile. They know that suggesting someone forget what they saw is far more effective than demanding silence because it frames compliance as the witness's choice rather than forced submission. They understand that taking documentation rather than destroying it maintains the fiction of official process while ensuring evidence remains controlled. Every action is calibrated to achieve maximum compliance while minimizing the risk of witness rebellion or public exposure. What emerges from this analysis is profoundly disturbing. We're not dealing with random intrusions or accidental encounters. We're looking at carefully orchestrated events that demonstrate deep understanding of human psychology, social structures, and information control. The phenomenon knows how to manage witness reactions, how to leave lasting impressions without causing severe trauma, how to ensure reports are filed through channels that can be monitored and controlled, and how to apply pressure that ensures long-term silence. This level of sophistication suggests we're dealing with an intelligence that has studied us extensively and learned precisely how to interact with us to achieve specific goals.
Now we need to confront what might be the most disturbing aspect of this entire phenomenon, the systematic suppression that follows encounters. This isn't conspiracy theory speculation. We have documented cases where official response demonstrates foreknowledge, arrives with impossible speed, and operates with concerning coordination across multiple agencies and decades. Let's start with the most basic question. How do these men in black know where to go? How do they know which witnesses to contact, often before those witnesses have finished filing their initial reports? In the Goulburn case, two men claiming to represent a government communications division arrived at the same afternoon the police report was filed. They didn't check electrical infrastructure as their stated purpose would suggest. Instead, they asked specific questions about the figure the family had seen. How did it look? How did it move? What physical effects did witnesses experience? These weren't generic questions from officials investigating a power outage. These were targeted inquiries from people who already knew what had occurred. The pattern repeats with disturbing consistency. In case after case, officials arrive too quickly with too much knowledge. They know details that weren't included in preliminary reports. They ask questions that reveal familiarity with the type of encounter that occurred. They focus on documentation and evidence rather than witness welfare or public safety, and they consistently discourage further discussion while offering no substantive explanation for what happened. The Dr. Herbert Hopkins case provides perhaps the clearest window into how this suppression operates. The sequence of events there is particularly revealing. Hopkins receives a phone call from someone claiming to represent a UFO research group. The caller asks if Hopkins is alone. Upon confirming he is, the caller requests permission to visit. Hopkins agrees. Then, immediately after hanging up the phone, there's a knock at the door. The visitor has arrived in seconds, far too quickly to have traveled any distance. This suggests the caller was already outside, perhaps watching the house, timing the call to ensure Hopkins would be alone when the visit occurred. The visitor's appearance was deeply unsettling, entirely bald, with no eyebrows or eyelashes, skin unnaturally pale and waxy, lips that appeared painted on rather than natural, movements stiff and awkward as if unfamiliar with human locomotion. This wasn't simply someone in disguise. The artificiality was too complete, too thorough. Either this was an elaborate costume designed to be deliberately disturbing, or it was something attempting to mimic human appearance but not quite succeeding. What happened during that visit reveals sophisticated psychological manipulation. The visitor demonstrated abilities Hopkins couldn't explain, making a coin disappear completely while Hopkins held it in his own hand, watching it shimmer and blur before vanishing entirely. This wasn't stage magic. Hopkins was a trained physician, accustomed to careful observation. He saw something that violated his understanding of physical reality, leaving him profoundly shaken and more receptive to the authority the visitor projected. The visitor knew intimate details about Hopkins's hypnosis sessions with an abduction witness. Information that should have been completely private, locked in Hopkins's notes and recordings. The visitor quoted specific statements and described specific sessions, proving beyond doubt that someone had access to information Hopkins had never shared publicly. This demonstration of surveillance capability served its purpose perfectly. Hopkins realized he had no privacy, no security, no protection from whoever was monitoring his work. The instruction that followed was delivered with chilling calm. Destroy all evidence of your work on this case, the notes, the tapes, everything. If you don't comply, there will be consequences. Not shouted or delivered with dramatic threat, but stated with clinical certainty that made resistance seem futile. Hopkins complied. He destroyed materials that represented weeks of careful investigation. Fear had overwhelmed curiosity completely. Now consider what this reveals about the suppression infrastructure. Someone was monitoring Hopkins's work closely enough to know when he conducted sessions, what was discussed, and where the recordings were kept. Someone had the capability to coordinate a visit that occurred immediately after a phone call, suggesting either the visitor was already nearby or had technology that allowed instant arrival. Someone understood exactly how much demonstration was needed to overcome Hopkins's professional skepticism and ensure compliance. And someone operated with confidence that there would be no consequences, no investigation, no pushback from law enforcement or professional organizations. This same pattern appears in the Sheila Franklin case, but with even more disturbing implications. Franklin was an ordinary person, not a researcher or investigator. She simply reported a sighting to a UFO organization. Yet, within days, 2 men appeared at her door knowing details she hadn't shared publicly. They knew what she had told her coworker. They knew she intended to contact investigators. They knew specifics about the sighting itself that only she should have known. This suggests surveillance capabilities that extend far beyond monitoring prominent researchers. If ordinary witnesses discussing sightings in private conversations can be identified and contacted within days, the monitoring infrastructure must be extraordinarily comprehensive. The subsequent intimidation Franklin experienced shows how thoroughly this suppression can dominate someone's life. Cars idling outside her home at different hours, phone lines clicking and popping during conversations with her own voice echoing back as if someone was listening on another line. Her home entered while she was away, nothing valuable stolen, but her notebook containing details of her sighting taken. Each incident carefully calculated to maintain pressure without providing evidence of illegal harassment. Franklin stopped sleeping normally, stopped answering her door, stopped discussing the encounter with anyone. The suppression achieved its goal completely. What resources would be required to maintain this level of operation across decades and continents? We're talking about a network that can monitor communications globally, identify witnesses worth suppressing before they become public problems, deploy personnel who can arrive rapidly anywhere in the world, conduct surveillance sophisticated enough to know private details witnesses haven't shared, and do all of this without leaving traces that law enforcement or intelligence agencies acknowledge. The scale of resources and coordination required is staggering.
Yet, despite this massive infrastructure, patterns emerge that seem almost deliberately designed to be noticed by those paying attention. The men in black appearances are consistently bizarre enough to be memorable. Their knowledge is too specific to dismiss as lucky guessing. Their timing is too perfect to be coincidence. It's as if the suppression itself is meant to be noticed, not by the general public, but by witnesses and researchers. As if someone wants certain people to know they're being watched, that resistance is futile, that silence is the only safe option. This brings us to perhaps the most disturbing possibility. What if the suppression isn't separate from the encounters? What if it's part of the same phenomenon? The entities that appear in these cases demonstrate sophisticated understanding of human psychology and social structures. The suppression that follows demonstrates equally sophisticated understanding of fear, authority, and information control. Both operate with precision that suggests deep knowledge of human behavior and institutions. Both seem designed to achieve specific psychological effects rather than simply gathering information or eliminating witnesses. What if the encounters and the suppression are 2 parts of a single operation? The encounters create witnesses with undeniable personal experiences. The suppression ensures those witnesses remain isolated, their testimony trapped in private channels where it can't build into broader public awareness. Together, they create a situation where hundreds or thousands of people know something extraordinary happened to them, but each remains convinced they're alone, that no one will believe them, that speaking out brings danger rather than validation. This is perhaps the most effective way to hide something in plain sight, create abundant evidence but ensure it remains fragmentary, isolated, impossible to assemble into the coherent picture that would force official acknowledgement.
Let's bring everything together now and examine what this pattern reveals when we step back and look at the complete picture. We've analyzed witness selection, technological capabilities, psychological operations, and suppression infrastructure. What do these elements tell us when considered as a whole? First, the phenomenon demonstrates clear intentionality. These aren't random events or accidental encounters. Something selects specific witnesses, often trained professionals whose testimony carries credibility. It approaches them in ways designed to create lasting impressions while avoiding overwhelming trauma. It demonstrates capabilities that remain beyond our understanding, not in vague, ambiguous ways, but through specific, repeatable effects that appear consistently across time and location.
And it ensures that documentation exists but remains controlled, inaccessible to public analysis but preserved in official channels. Second, the pattern suggests this has been ongoing for decades with remarkable consistency. Cases from the 1950s show the same witness selection patterns, the same technological capabilities, the same suppression tactics as cases from the 21st century. Whatever this represents, it hasn't evolved significantly over more than 70 years of encounters. Either it achieved its optimal approach decades ago and saw no reason to change, or the consistent methodology itself serves some purpose we don't yet understand.
Third, the phenomenon appears designed to operate at the threshold of undeniability without crossing into unambiguous proof. Encounters are dramatic enough that witnesses can never dismiss them, but ambiguous enough that public discourse can maintain plausible skepticism. Evidence exists but never in forms that allow definitive scientific analysis. Multiple witnesses observe the same events but are systematically discouraged from coordinating their testimony. Documentation is created through official channels but remains inaccessible or classified. This suggests we're witnessing something far more sophisticated than simple observation or study. If the goal was merely to gather information about humanity, there would be no need for the elaborate psychological choreography evident in these encounters. If the goal was to remain completely hidden, the encounters wouldn't happen at all, or would involve complete memory suppression rather than leaving witnesses with clear recall. Instead, the pattern suggests something that wants to be seen by specific individuals while ensuring those observations don't coalesce into broader public awareness. Consider what this achieves. Thousands of trained professionals and ordinary citizens carry personal knowledge that something extraordinary exists. They've seen evidence of technologies beyond our capabilities, intelligence that operates with clear purpose, suppression that demonstrates concerning coordination. Yet each witness remains isolated, unable to share their experience without fear, convinced that speaking out brings danger rather than validation. This creates a situation where evidence is abundant but fractured. Testimony is credible but scattered, and the phenomenon remains simultaneously undeniable and deniable, depending on whether you've experienced it directly.
The suppression infrastructure itself reveals something profound. The resources required to maintain global surveillance, deploy personnel rapidly anywhere in the world, and coordinate across decades suggest involvement at the highest levels of power. Yet no government agency admits operating this suppression. No intelligence organization claims responsibility. No military branch acknowledges the encounters, despite their obvious focus on strategic installations. This systematic denial creates a bureaucratic void where the phenomenon operates with impunity, protected not by secrecy, but by institutional refusal to acknowledge its existence officially. What does all this suggest about ultimate purpose? Perhaps the phenomenon isn't hiding from humanity in general, but rather managing the pace of disclosure, creating a growing population of individuals with direct experience, building evidence that exists but remains controlled, allowing awareness to spread gradually through unofficial channels while preventing sudden revelation that might trigger social disruption. This would explain why encounters continue despite obvious risk of exposure. The encounters themselves are part of the process, creating witnesses who know but can't prove, building pressure for acknowledgement while maintaining enough ambiguity that official denial remains viable. Or perhaps something even more unsettling is occurring. What if the suppression itself is the message? What if the point isn't to hide the phenomenon, but to demonstrate something about the nature of control and authority in human society? The Men in Black encounters specifically reveal how easily ordinary people can be intimidated into silence by authority that needs no credentials, offers no accountability, and faces no consequences. They show how comprehensive surveillance can be, how thoroughly privacy can be violated, how completely information can be controlled. Perhaps we're being shown something about the real structure of power in our world, something that goes far beyond elected governments and public institutions.
The pattern also suggests long-term planning. This isn't a recent development or temporary operation. The consistency across decades indicates something engaged in a multi-generational project, operating on timescales that dwarf human planning horizons. Whatever this represents thinks in terms of decades or centuries, not quarterly reports or election cycles. It has maintained operational security while conducting thousands of encounters across every continent. It has preserved capabilities that remain beyond our technological reach despite our own rapid advancement. And it has done all this while leaving just enough evidence to ensure that someday, when circumstances are right, the accumulated testimony will become undeniable. We're left with profound questions that demand serious consideration. What intelligence operates with this level of sophistication? What purpose requires both demonstrating advanced capabilities and ensuring those demonstrations remain officially unacknowledged? What goal is served by creating thousands of isolated witnesses rather than making one undeniable public appearance? Why target nuclear facilities and strategic installations so consistently? And perhaps most importantly, what does the pattern of escalating encounters over the past 80 years suggest about what comes next? The evidence examined tonight points towards something far more complex and concerning than simple visitation by extraterrestrial tourists. We're looking at what appears to be a carefully orchestrated operation that demonstrates advanced technology, sophisticated understanding of human psychology, and concerning access to suppression infrastructure. Whether this represents non-human intelligence studying humanity, human covert operations beyond public knowledge, or something that blurs the boundary between those possibilities, the pattern is clear and the implications are profound.
For those who've experienced these encounters directly, the phenomenon is absolutely real. For those studying the accumulated testimony, the consistency and credibility of witnesses demands serious attention. For those willing to look at the pattern rather than individual cases, something extraordinary and deeply unsettling emerges. We are not alone. We are being observed. We are being studied. And the observations are being systematically suppressed by forces that operate beyond public accountability or official acknowledgement. The question now isn't whether this is happening. The evidence makes that clear. The question is what we do with that knowledge. Do we maintain comfortable denial? Do we demand official transparency? Do we prepare for what the escalating pattern suggests might be coming? The encounters continue, the suppression continues, the pattern holds. And somewhere, something watches, waiting to see how long we'll maintain our collective pretense that none of this is real. Thank you for listening. The truth isn't out there. It's here, documented in thousands of case files, witnessed by credible professionals, and systematically hidden by forces that don't want you connecting the dots. Now you've seen the pattern. What you do with that knowledge is up to you.